And so, welcome. And this is the Speaker's Toolbox, Perfecting the Craft of Speaking, with a focus on entrepreneurs. And I decided to do it a little bit different for entrepreneurs because there's some unique, I guess, attributes in terms of the demand for entrepreneurs to speak. It's not like your typical business presentation where you might be in a corporate boardroom or a meeting room or something of that nature, and you're using your traditional PowerPoint or your flip charts and those kinds of things. What I found through my coaching and working with entrepreneurs over the last few years is that their particular ask is a little bit different. They're typically requested to come out and speak about their success in business or their success in whatever venture they've undertaken. And it typically might be to a professional association, it might be to a community association, could be the board of trade, it could be any number of things where they've been asked to share their insights, share their story, share their success, that sort of thing. And for many of these individuals, they want to be the face and voice of their business. But unfortunately lack the confidence to do that. And it's a bit of an irony because they've been so successful in their businesses that they put all their energy into that and really didn't take time to think about, some other areas of personal development, in particular public speaking. And so they find themselves somewhat inadequate or somewhat uncomfortable in terms of taking that on. And the other complication is that for some of them, particularly if they've been very successful, don't want to show any kind of weakness. They don't want to show a chink in the armor. So, it becomes yet another challenge. So it's just interesting, the unique nuances of entrepreneurs over traditional business professionals, which we spoke to last week. So that's kind of the backdrop that I'd like you to keep in mind as I go through the content here. So I'm going to start off with, into my slide. So basically, here's, I guess, an overview of what I'm going to cover in the next 45 to 50 minutes. So we are going to begin with the basics. This is kind of a foundational, this is foundational content, really, but it is something to help folks understand what they have available to them. So we're going to go through the basics, and then we're going to talk about perfecting your preparation, because no matter what group you're speaking to, you need to have a sense of who your audience truly is. And we're going to touch a little bit on building your message. Of course, delivering the package is what's really critical, and that's where most people find it the most challenging. Many of us can certainly write our story or write our content or write our message because we know that message really, really well. Typically, that's why we're being asked. And then we'll do a quick recap and a summary. So in terms of opening thoughts, one of the things I'd like to share here is that basically I'm talking about something that's been around since man's been on earth. It's been an anxiety or fear of speaking, or the desire to be better at speaking. Either way, it's been with us for a long time. And so I'm not going to be sharing anything new here. You're going to be hearing things that you, for the most part, already know. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to package it a little bit differently so that it sticks, it stays with you, and have you look at public speaking in a very different context. Now, I look at it as a craft. And when you think about it as a craft, that kind of implies that we have tools available, and we certainly do with public speaking. And some of the most significant tools that we have are non-physical. And what that means is that those tools are with us no matter where we go and who we speak to. So I'm going to try to highlight some of those as I go through. As well, I've actually created some concepts that I'd like to share with you. And again, these are things that we can use to our advantage whenever we're speaking in front of us, speaking to a group of people. The last thing I want to say in the opening thoughts is that the concepts and the tools and the different information that I'm going to put together over the next several minutes is applicable to all forms of oral communication. It's one-on-one or one on 1,000. So keep that in mind as well, because this is not just about public speaking. Although public speaking is the biggest focus of what I want to share with you. But these tools and these concepts are applicable to one-on-one or one-on-a-few conversations as well. I want to start out with a quadrant, and this is something I put together a few years ago based on some discussions I was having with some colleagues and clients at the time. And I come to realize that there's basically 4 categories of individuals, and there's also 4 categories of classification as well. So this quadrant view is applicable on 2 levels. One, it's at the personal level, the individual level, where you decide if the individual fits into either one of these quadrants, and we'll go through some of the criteria here in a second. And the other way of viewing it is, what does the position require? So if you're in sales, what kind of things would be expected of you? What's expected of a sales position? So it's helpful for employers to have a sense of where the individual fits within these 4 quadrants, but also where does the job function fit within these 4 quadrants? So keep that in mind as well. So first off, I want to start, the left-hand side is basically the least desirable. We'll say it there. So we got 2 axes that we're operating from. So we got communication effectiveness, and as you go across the bottom, that implies that the more effective you are with your communication, then of course the better. The same thing with speaking comfort. However, there has to be a balance between the 2, otherwise you end up with a skew on it. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on the student. I'll start at the bottom left first. And basically we're talking here entry-level positions, new hires, maybe it's a new job, a new role that you've taken on within the workplace. Any of those kind of situations, and maybe you've been working for 25, 30 years, and now you find yourself into a new role. All of a sudden, you're thrust into the student quadrant because you still don't have the knowledge of the role or the function to be considered an expert in it. So to communicate, your communication is going to be not as effective and not as well defined in the early stages, and this is something that evolves with time and evolves with training as well. So there's ways of there's training that can be available to transition from a student to an expert, for example. But keep in mind that at various stages in our lives, we all find ourselves in the student quadrant. So basically, it's not a product of, and some of us, because it's not a product of who we are, it's a product of the situation at the time. Now, if you have a lot of experience in the workplace, a lot of experience with an organization, you can transition out of that student quadrant fairly quickly. But keep in mind that when you start out, that's where you are. The next quadrant is the performer. And one thing about the performer, and these are just labels that I put on these quadrants, but the underlying description will help bring more clarity to them. So with the performer, they don't always believe in what they're saying. Basically yet they're good at delivering someone else's content. So they're comfortable speaking. Actually, a lot of them are not just it's beyond comfortable. They enjoy speaking. It doesn't matter if the content is correct or if it's accurate. They can be entertaining, but they may be entertaining to the demise of the message. So if they're just entertainers, then fundamentally they're performers. So they're comfortable speaking. They can get up in front of a group of people at the drop of a dime, but their communication effectiveness is not as strong as it could be. Now, through training, can transition from the performer category over to the evangelist category because they're already comfortable at the speaking. They just need to get more comfortable or more effective with the communication side of it. The lower right-hand corner is our expert category, expert quadrant. And these are usually subject matter experts. They're engineers, they're IT architects, they're technical analysts, they're in those kinds of individuals. You could have a radio personality in here, not comfortable speaking in public, but very comfortable behind the microphone and with the anonymity of just voice as opposed to voice and video. They have all the content. They're very effective with their communication. Just not comfortable being in public. And I've come to realize that there are individuals that within organizations that will never aspire to get up and speak or present to a group of people. They're fine in one-on-one or small groups, small teams, and they communicate very effectively in those kinds of situations. Does that mean that they're not contributing to their organization or to the company that they work for because they aren't comfortable getting up and speaking? No, absolutely not. They do their job in a very different way. And there's lots of other people that are willing to take on that public role. So they make a contribution. The big thing here is that their communication is effective. And that's what we got to keep in mind. Now, the last quadrant is the evangelist quadrant. And it's basically here where you would see your sales force, you'd see your senior management. They know their subject really well. They believe in it, and they're really effective at delivering their message. And so this is the quadrant that we most aspire for. So we call it the sweet spot. And so the evangelist is the one where we want to transition. So all of these, with the proper training, with the proper exposure, with the proper opportunity, you can transition into the evangelist. But keep in mind that there's not everybody, it's not for everyone. There are individuals that will prefer to stay in the expert quadrant and not subject themselves to the, I guess, the discomfort of having to get up in front of a group of people. Okay. The anxiety cone, and I need to take my L off of there. I got a little bit of an error in the title, but the message here is, again, it's a visual, and I try to use visuals to convey the various concepts that I want to share with you, as opposed to just putting down words or just giving you an oral description. And so if we think about the whole idea of an anxiety cone, what happens is that at the top of the cone, we have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of ideas in our head at any given time. And okay, just checking the comments. Oh, don't worry about the flow there, Paul. Not a problem at all. This is, and matter of fact, this is what's going to occur with live webinars as I go forward. And there are going to be, I just come off of one just this morning. So yeah, no, not a problem there. You go ahead and do whatever you need to do. I just wanted to get an opportunity to go through the flow of the content here. And where there's only 3 of us, it's no biggie. So, but actually trying to read the comments on the fly is a good thing, because I need to get a better feel for how I interact in those kinds of situations. So yeah, no, I need to be able to interrupt what I'm saying or doing to respond to a question or, you know, share a comment with the rest of the group. So thanks for that. So anyway, back to the anxiety cone. So what happens is we have a lot of ideas, and if we're comfortable standing in front of a group of people and speaking to them, those ideas are just floating around, and we're able to pluck them out with very little effort. Like, there's lots of ideas, and we're able to pick those ideas right out of the blue, sort of thing, and be spontaneous in our presentation or our speech because of that. Sometimes we'll feed off the audience. You know, one of the things I do with this, my content here, whether it's in this presentation for Speaking with Confidence, or the other one that I did last week, Present with Confidence, is that I use the slides to guide me in terms of the core messages that I want to share. But I will always share them differently every single time. They never come out the same way twice. So it's just taking advantage of that comfort level and being spontaneous and creative as I go to share that message. And you can only do that if you're comfortable speaking to a group of people. As you get down to the bottom of this cone, you can see that everything's jammed together. The ideas are still there. They're still the same ideas, but our ability to retrieve them is very, very difficult. And in some cases, it can't happen at all. In the worst case scenario, we freeze up. Now, in reality, most of us fit somewhere in between. We're never really 100% on either of these extremes. So we're usually somewhere in between. The whole notion, when you think about the anxiety cone, is that you want to be doing things that are going to help to move you up to the top of that cone, so that the more comfortable you are, the more ideas that are available to you, and the easier it is to retrieve them. And so think about that as we go through the rest of the content here, and how ways that you can move up that cone. And of course, speaking is a doing thing, so you really got to take advantage of every single opportunity to do just that. Another thing I come across a few years ago, I guess a revelation of sorts. We have an expression within the speaking profession. We may forget what you said, but we'll never forget the way you made me feel. And that reminded me is that because feeling is a kind of a really subjective thing, but if we create our speech or presentation with some thought to the kind of feeling that we want to create. So I reflected on what are the virtues? What are the virtues that we want to share or we want to project whenever we speak to a group of people? And so I've got a list here. I don't know. I think there's probably about 70 of them there altogether. There are a few more besides this, but just something to get it kick-started. And what I suggest to people is that they pick 2 or 3 before they speak and when they're doing their rehearsal or preparation, and identify those 2 or 3 as the ones that they want to be known for when they speak or present. Now, it might change from group to group, from speech to speech, and that's fine. It's whatever comes to mind at the moment. Now, you may look at this and say, oh, there could be a dozen in there that I'd certainly align with. And that's fine as well. If you want to start off with a dozen, circle a dozen, but bring it down to 2 or 3 when you actually deliver your speech or deliver your presentation, because any more than that, it gets too challenging to kind of create that sense. So if I want to come across as sincere, then I reflect on sincerity. If I want to come across as authentic, then I reflect on authenticity. If I want to be known for my enthusiasm, then I reflect on my enthusiasm. So there's 2 or 3 that I could actually pluck right out. They're fairly common for me. I certainly want to be known as enthusiastic. I want to be known as sincere, and I want to be known as authentic. So there's others in here that would be similar, and I might pick those on another occasion. But the point here is just pick 2 or 3, reflect on what they are as you speak, and the fact that you want to be known for that with your message. And your message will start to get infused with that. It'll come out in your body language. It'll come out in your vocal variety, your facial expression, those kinds of things. This is a take from a Seinfeld episode back some years ago, and the book of list basically identifies and has identified on a couple of occasions that our fear of speaking in public outranks our fear of death by emergence as high as 2 to 1 at times. And so if you keep that in mind, that would imply that most people would rather be in the box than at the microphone speaking. So if you think you're a bit anxious about speaking, well, you can take solace in the fact that you're definitely not alone. I'd like to share a few quotes, so I'll kick this one off with if at first you don't succeed, skydiving isn't for you. So now some of you may be saying, well, what does skydiving got to do with public speaking? Well, I think there's some parallels. I really do. And the biggest parallel is that you have to be willing to make a leap of faith. You have to be willing to jump out of a perfectly good airplane and trust to your parachute if you want to skydive. If you want to become a more confident speaker, then you have to be willing to make that leap of faith as well. At the time when every fiber of your being is screaming that dire things are going to happen, you need to push through that and do it. Now, I've been around public speaking for a long time, and I've never seen anybody die. I've never even seen anybody faint. I've seen signs of nervousness, absolutely. But at the end of the day, nothing happens. The world doesn't stop, right? So we can push through it, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through. I like to standardize folks on a definition of communication. There are arguably other definitions that we could use, but I've been using this one for many years, and it's just nice and concise, and it serves well for what I'm trying to get across. And I think for most of us, if I was to ask the question to tell me what communication is, I think most of you would say communication is the giving and receiving of ideas and information. We probably wouldn't pick up on the fact, or many of us wouldn't pick up on the fact that we share attitudes as well. But we absolutely do. We'll expand upon that a little bit as we go along. So I've got attitudes highlighted. The other word I've got highlighted, even though we would definitely come up with it, is receiving. So as much as we recognize that communication is a giving and receiving process, we don't spend anywhere near enough time on the receiving focus. So we're going to touch on that as well. So it's really important that we're paying attention to the words and the communications that are coming back to us. I created a communication model several years ago, and again, just wanted to get a visual. This is a snapshot in time because communication is a constant toggling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so this is frozen in time. And so there's 5 pieces to my communication model. The first is the presenter, and the second is the receiver. So we have a sender receiver. Keep in mind that this toggles back and forth, back and forth. Then we also have a message. So the sender is sending out a message. The receiver is taking that message, processing it, and is providing feedback. Now that feedback could be in a one-on-one scenario such as this, could be another question, could be a clarifying comment, could be anything. It could also be a nonverbal communication. It could be facial expression. It could be body language. It could be eye contact. So these are the 4 cornerstones of the communication model. And if it was a perfect world, then everything would be fine. But it's not a perfect world. There are all kinds of things that can affect and compromise that communication process and make it less than what it probably could or should be. And so here's just a few things to keep in mind. And there's literally thousands of things. I'm sure as you look at this, you could think of dozens of others that would come to mind very quickly. So in his case, it could be attitude. He's a bit cocky, piece of cake. Maybe it's a trust issue. Got focus on something else, wants to be somewhere else. Could be something that happened earlier in the day that's still impacting on him. On this side, we see focus on thinking about being somewhere else. If it's a nice sunny day, maybe out golfing. And just environmental, and the list goes on and on and on. And I like to put a label on those sorts of things so that it sticks with us. And so what I've called this is noise. So these are noise factors. And one of the concepts that I've introduced back several years ago is the concept of managing the noise. So we want to identify the noise factors and manage them where possible. And we can do that in a whole lot of ways. So if we walk into a room and the room is cold and we have ability to change the thermostat, then we would certainly do it. The reverse of that would be true. If it's too hot, bring the thermostat down, open a window, do whatever you need to do in order to make the environment suitable and conducive to good communication. If there's physical noise, then you may want to do something a little bit different. Maybe the room layout is not set up quite the way you want it. I did a session in Clarenville back many years ago for a group of students, and we were in the theater out there. The theater could hold, I think, about 350 people. We only had about 50 students. So I had the organizers cordon off most of basically the last 3/4 of the room or 2/3 of the room so that nobody could go up there, because the students would gravitate to the back rows very, very quickly, and the energy in the room would just be negligent. It would just be sucked right out of it. But by bringing everybody forward to the front of the room, I was able to engage them in a much more meaningful way. So look for the noise factors. There's always noise factors. And some of them we have control over. And if you do, make sure you take advantage of that control. This is one of the reasons why it's important that we show up a little bit early. So get there before the group or the crowd starts to settle in, or before your audience settles in. That way you have a good jump on it. You have a good sense of what the real noise factors are. And if you can change them, do so. If you can't, then at least you know what they are and know how to deal with them. The other thing that thinking about the concept of noise does, I believe, is that it makes us mentally prepared for the unknown. Because there are going to be things that'll happen in the spur of a moment that we never would probably dreamed of. But if we know that there's going to be other noise factor considerations, then we're ready for it. So when it does happen, we're not taken aback. We're not totally surprised. And we deal with them a lot more effectively because of that. So it doesn't throw us off our game as badly as it would if we didn't think about the concept that something can go wrong. Doesn't mean we focus on that. It just means we're prepared for when it does happen to deal with it in the most effective way we can. Okay. The 3 V's of communication. So I just want to touch on these again. This is a study that was done at the University of LA back in, wow, the late 60s. So it's been around a long time. It's been read on a few times over the years. The numbers change slightly, but they're still pretty dramatic. And so when we talk about the visual, we're talking about our nonverbal communication. So those are things like eye contact, facial expression, body language, gestures, those sorts of things. When we talk about voice, we're talking about things like tone, we're talking about speed, we're talking about volume, we're talking about intonation, those kinds of concepts. And when we talk about words, that's the actual message. And so here's the results of the study. Now, when I saw this first, I thought, 55 was really a surprise. I never thought in the context. This is in the early years of me getting into the speaking profession. I never thought about it in the context of nonverbal communication. And now that I know, the significance of that percentage, that becomes a very big part of certainly my world as it relates to speaking, because 55% is occurring at the non-verbal level. So that means we're not saying anything to one another vocally, we're doing it at a non-verbal level. The other thing I was surprised with was 7% for the words, and I felt that the message should have been a little bit higher. But when I looked closer at the study, I realized that they had a disclaimer in there. They basically made an assumption that the message was correct. And once you do that, it sort of takes the weighting down on what the verbal it really is. And it makes sense now that I look back on it, because if this was the wrong message and I was really good at the vocal and the visual, then really what I'd be doing is I'd become an expert at delivering the wrong message. I'd be very good at delivering the wrong message, and that's not what we want to do. So the 55% also gives us another opportunity. It gives us an opportunity to listen with our eyes. Now, if you're in front of a group of people or even communicating one-on-one, you can start to take advantage of this concept. So the next time you have a conversation, the next time you get to speak, make sure you listen with your eyes. Look for that nonverbal message. And the more you look for it, the better you'll get at interpreting it. We will not always interpret it correctly. There are going to be times that we may have an error in judgment in terms of what we think is being said non-verbally and what is really being said. And I've had that experience a few times over the years as well. But the majority of the time, it is pretty accurate. And we can get an awful lot of information from our audience if we listen with our eyes. So if you're standing in front of a group of people, that doesn't mean you're not listening. You absolutely should be listening. You should be listening with your eyes. You should be looking for their body language, their facial expression, their eye contact, looking for their reaction to the words and the messages that you are sharing with them. And then you can use that as you become more and more comfortable. You get back into that anxiety cone. As you get more and more comfortable, you can use that information on the fly to readjust what it is you're saying or how you're saying it. Another concept I want to share is the speaker's toolbox. It's something I put together back many years ago when I first started thinking about public speaking as a craft. And the tools that I'm going to share with you here are tools that I have seen over and over and over again. And they're used religiously. And the beauty of them is that they're not physical. They're with us no matter where we go. And so the first one is eye contact. Eye contact allows us to engage our audience, and it allows us to pull them back in if we start to lose that engagement. So if I'm making eye contact with an individual, it puts a whole different level of engagement into play. Now, if you're dealing with a large audience, you clearly don't make eye contact with every single person. But it's important that we create the perception that we do. And we can do that in a couple of ways. One of the ways that we can do it is just mentally scan or physically scan the room, left to right, front to rear, and then crisscross. Sometimes I use a triangle or two triangle, kind of imaginary triangles in a room, and just have the base of the triangle at the front where you are, and the point at the top would be the back of the room, and just scan that. And then the other triangle overlays on it where the base is at the back of the room and the point is at the front. So it gives you 6 waypoints to stop off. And the important thing to keep in mind is that you don't spend any great amount of time with any one point. You don't want to create the perception that you're focusing on one or two individuals. You want to create the sense of balance, that you're engaging everybody. And there's lots of times that if you're in a large audience where the individual on stage appears to be looking right at us, and in reality, they might be looking at a person 2 rows behind. But because it's such a large room, you can create that perception of eye contact. So keep that in mind and use eye contact to re-engage your audience if you're starting to lose them. Vocal variety. Yeah. In the written word, there's all kinds of ways that we can draw attention to the written word. There's all kinds of punctuation. There's italics, there's bold, there's question marks, there's exclamation marks, there's semicolons and commas and colons, and we can use different colors and different style fonts and all those kinds of things that we can do with the written word. Well, vocal variety is the punctuation for the spoken word. So we can use tone, we can use speed, we can use volume. Like, for example, I might want to say, I got something really important to tell you. So you raise the volume up to get their attention. Or we might go just the exact opposite. Maybe we'll do something like make them lean in and say, I got something really important to tell you. And make them lean in to get the message. But either way, you're creating a nice mix and you're shaking up your vocal message. You're shaking up the vocals to emphasize your message. So use vocal variety. Watch your speed. Newfoundlanders are blessed with the wonderful affliction of trying to cram as many words into the space of 1 minute as humanly possible. And I confess there are times, even though I'm not a native Newfoundlander, I've gotten very good at doing just that. So be aware of your own idiosyncrasies. Are there things that you do that might make it difficult for other people to understand you, and make the necessary adjustment? Like if we have a loud, boisterous voice and we don't tone that down from time to time, then that can become annoying to our audience. The same is true if we're too soft-spoken. So we need that vocal variety, bring life and pizzazz to our speech or our presentation. Body gestures. So we do body language, posture, hand gestures, keeping your feet planted on the floor. I see an awful lot of individuals that will shuffle around and cross their legs, and sometimes I wonder how they can even stand and speak at the same time with some of the positions that they get into. So keep that in mind. You want to come across as confident, and one of the greatest ways to create that perception, because if you're not confident, and that's probably going to be the case when you first start out, is you want to create the perception that you are. One of the best ways to create that perception is to have great posture, great body language, and great gestures. Keep your feet planted on the floor. Don't shuffle back and forth and display your nervousness. So keep your feet planted and focus in nice erect position and share your message. You actually have more energy when you do that too, by the way. And if you get your hands involved, get them up from below your waist, that brings more energy to your presentation or to your speech as well. So keep that in mind. Facial expression. Another powerful tool. We can convey just about every single emotion there is using facial expression. We can convey concern, we can convey joy, we can convey sadness, we can convey empathy, we can convey excitement. You name it, we can pretty much convey it using facial expression. And facial expression is probably one of the more powerful tools to start to share some of our personality. We can do it with our vocal variety as well, but facial expression is what's really going to connect us with our audience, to show them that we're really enthusiastic about what we're saying, that we really pleased with the opportunity to speak to them. Whatever it is that we want to convey to our audience, take advantage of facial expression to do that, because in the process of doing that, you start to share your personality. The last tool in the speaker's toolbox, and there are others, by the way, but these are the 5 that come up over and over and over again. And that's the pause. It's not the notes that makes the music. It's the pause between the notes. And the same is true with public speaking or with speaking in general. We want to make a point, then we want to use the pause very strategically. So yeah, I've got something really important to tell you. Now that was just 3 seconds. And we put that pause in there, and we allow the audience an opportunity to prepare for what's coming next. It just puts emphasis on the next piece of the message, because now we've drawn attention to it. We could, if you're going to tell a story, or going to tell a humor story in particular, you need to put a pause before the punchline, and you need to put a pause after. The pause before is just to set up the punchline, to make sure that everybody's paying attention and that they're going to get it. And then the pause after is giving them the opportunity to process it. And that might be to process it to laugh, or process it to think a little bit further. While you're doing that pause, you have the opportunity to listen with your eyes. You get the opportunity to observe your audience and see, are they agreeing with your message? Are they in disagreement? Are there signs of concern? Are there signs of confusion? All those kinds of things. So take advantage of those pauses to not only put punctuation to your spoken word, but also to get the opportunity to listen with your eyes. So those are the 5 tools in the speaker's toolbox. They're with you no matter where you go, and also they're applicable to one-on-one or one-on-1,000 type of situations. My grandmother used to say this to me when I was young, so I guess I always had the gift of gab at some level, despite my challenges in my early 20s when it came to speaking anxiety. But somehow I guess I didn't have it quite as bad when I was younger. So she used to say, give them 2 years. And I want to take to one more level. And I agree with this. I think you should listen twice as much as we speak, because in the process of doing that, we get that much more information that makes us more effective when we ultimately do speak, because now we're speaking from knowledge as opposed to partial knowledge. We're speaking from a place of having as much knowledge as we possibly can because we've listened effectively. But when we think of 2 ears, the other thing to keep in mind for me is there's 2 considerations. One is that we use one ear to hear what is said, and we use the other ear to hear how it's said. So we get the full deal in. This is a Chinese verb, and I came across this a few years ago, and I really liked it for a couple of reasons. One, it put a visual to a concept that I wanted to share with my clients and audiences. And so it's made up of basically 4 components. So not surprisingly, ears is one of them. We've already heard about listening with our eyes, so hence the eyes are in here. And we've already talked about, the importance of, probably not deeply, but the importance of undivided attention. So if you're going to listen, you have to listen with intent. And you do that, but by giving listening your undivided attention. And genuinely listen to the individual. Don't be distracted by things that are going on around you or behind them, and because there's nothing worse than having somebody speak to somebody and realize that they're looking right past you and they've got their attention focused on something behind you instead of listening to what you're saying, and it just creates it's not a nice feeling. So keep that in mind. So provide undivided attention. And the last one is heart. And this goes back to the virtues that I shared with you earlier. So this is where we inject heart into our communications. And so how are we making them feel? How are they making us feel? And so that becomes an important, because if they make us feel good, if we go away with a positive feeling, then they've injected real heart into it. And that's a much better situation. So reflect on those virtues that you want to be known for, and think about them as you speak, because they will infuse themselves into what you're doing and how you're doing it. Okay, I'm just going to touch a little bit on knowing your audience. You want to know how many will attend, the numbers, because there's different, because of the numbers, you're going to approach it a little bit differently. Like if you've got a small, intimate group, you may just have a very casual conversation with them. Now, you can still do that with a large audience as well. As a matter of fact, what I like about today's speaking style over what it was, say, 25, 30 years ago, is that more often than not, it is a conversational style. So individuals that are speaking are actually speaking with an intent to engage the audience. They want to have a conversation with the audience. And that conversation really starts to tie in this whole concept of listening with your eyes, because if you've got a large audience, the conversation is still going to be two-way, but it's not going to be an oral two-way conversation. It's going to be you speaking and them communicating non-verbally. but you're still having that conversation because you are listening with your eyes. So keep that in mind. Having a sense of who the makeup of your audience is beneficial as well. For example, I used to do a lot of work with schools and things of that nature a few years back, but I come to realize that as much as I had some really special moments in some of those situations, I'm really more comfortable speaking to an adult audience. That's just my reality. Male, female, young, old, so not too much there except for the young part. So, but whether it's male or female, that no difference. But understand who it is that you're speaking to, because if it's all female, then you may need to take out, there's different language that you might use, and not that it should be offensive or anything like that, but there may be different language that you'll call upon in order to communicate to that particular demographic. Are they invited or required to attend? This is more applicable to the workplace, where we see situations that come up from time to time where people are asked to attend something because they've been told, or they've been told to attend something by their manager because it's a requirement of the job or something of that nature. Not as applicable in the entrepreneurial world for most of what we're going to be talking about. Are they familiar with the topic? This is important because if they're familiar with the topic, you don't have to go into the same level of detail to bring them up to speed to get everybody grounded. However, if they're not familiar with the topic, then you absolutely have to do that because you're going to be speaking over their heads otherwise. If you don't help educate them to get them to a level where they can listen to your message, then your message is going to come up short. You're not going to be successful in the delivery of it. Will they be friendly, cold, or hostile? Well, and again, it depends on what you want to share with your audience. It depends on the nature of your message. But if you know up front that they might be warm to what your message is, then you need to keep that in the back of your mind. That might be one of the noise factors that you're actually going to have to deal with. So keep that in mind. And just a slide to reinforce the fact that audiences come in all shapes and sizes. So I'm just going to touch very briefly on building your message. It's a presentation model, and this is true of any speech, presentation, or scenario that you can come up with. There's only basically three components. You got the introduction, where you tell them what you're going to tell them. You've got the body, where you actually tell them, and that consists of just what are your main ideas, what are your key points that you want to share with them, and you want every one of those ideas and key points to have some supporting material. So do you want to do some anecdotal material? Maybe you're going to tell a story. Maybe you're going to tell or share some stats. Whatever it is, if you're going to state an idea, you need to reinforce it with some supporting material. And then the last piece is the conclusion. Tell them what you told them. And we do this sometimes in direct ways, sometimes we do it in abstract ways. So, it just depends on what your style is, what your message is, what the nature of the engagement is. And so you keep those things in mind and develop it accordingly. When you're building your message, whatever that message is, so if you're sharing your success story, for example, you want to begin in the middle. Now, this was totally contradictory to the way I thought back several years ago, but I've long since realized that this is the right approach. So we start in the middle. We want to list the key points that we want to make. So we just throw down a whole bunch of them. Don't worry about what they are at the early stage. You want to arrange them in order, so you get them all in order, and then you decide, which ones you want to use, and you're going to expand on those points, and then you develop your introduction, and then you develop your closing. So the purpose of developing, in the past, I would have said do introduction, then do your body, then do your close. Well, the reality is that as we develop the real message, which is the body of our speech or presentation, we get more ideas. There's more ideas come to play in terms of what might make a good introduction or good opening, what would make a good closing, that kind of thing. And this is going to lead into the rehearsal and delivery, but it is important that we do the right thing rather than do the thing right. And we have a tendency as human beings to gravitate towards something that we enjoy doing. So for example, we might spend an awful lot of time on PowerPoint. So we're really doing the thing right. We really are. We're the best at crafting our message in PowerPoint that we can be. But at the end of the day, is that really good use of our time? Are we doing the right thing? Well, maybe the right thing is that we actually rehearse our message and keep the PowerPoint to a bare minimum, because sometimes PowerPoint can be distracting and take away from our message. So we don't want that to happen. So we want to spend our time on the material, and keep in mind that we've been asked to deliver on a particular topic because we have a level of knowledge about that topic. So keep that in mind. And then apply the 80-20 rule, 80% on rehearsing the delivery and 20% on creating the content. I'm going to touch on nervousness. We spoke about a little bit about it earlier with the anxiety cone, but there are many, many different signs, and I've seen them all and probably experienced most of them over my own years. But one of my biggest ones, I guess, was I always had a saliva issue, and it felt like every drop of saliva that I had in my mouth would shoot to my armpits. It was just the way I reacted when I got up in front of a group of people. I'd get very dry in the mouth and yet perspire like crazy under my arms. So every one of us behave differently, I guess, and react differently and respond differently. For some, it might be a flushed face. For others, it might be some shaking of the hands or wobbling knees or things of that nature. But keep in mind that whatever those signs are, that's the worst that's going to happen to us. You're not going to die as a result of getting up and speaking in front of a group of people. Although for some people, it may feel that way, or that they might prefer to die rather than do what they're doing. But if you want to be a confident speaker, you can only be a confident speaker by speaking. So accept the fact that there will be signs, and keep in mind as well that for the most part, the audience is on your side. They're mentally applauding you for having the courage to do what you're doing. I can't say enough about preparation. I mean, if you're not prepared, then it's virtually impossible to be comfortable speaking to a group of people. You have to come prepared. Come early and be prepared. Don't show up at the last minute. That's not going to set you up well at all. So come early, get yourself climatized, get used to the room, get used to the layout. If you can stand at the front just before everybody arrives and just kind of visualize what's going to happen, then do that as well. Visualization, well known to world-class athletes. That's what they do. And they don't visualize failure. They visualize success. And I don't know what it is about human nature, but we seem to gravitate so quickly to failure when it comes to public speaking. Why not put that energy into visualizing success when we speak in front of a group of people and start to set ourselves up for that ultimate achievement? And lastly, we want to convert negative energy. So this is one thing I do want to expand a little bit on, because I've shared with you a bunch of concepts. I've shared with you managing the noise. I've shared with you the fact that we listen with our eyes because of the significant percentage that comes across as nonverbal communication. I've shared with you the concept of the speaker's toolbox, and where we have 5 unique tools that we can use at any given time that we're speaking to somebody. So use that, because what that does is, years ago, I left a job as a very successful sales representative with a large international Fortune 500 company. And I was presenting 2 to 3 times a week to boards and senior management teams and things of that nature. And every time I'd get up to present, I'd get a knot in my stomach. And that knot would not go away until I sat down. And I did that for about 1.5 years. And then finally, I just couldn't do it anymore. And I left the company and took another job. Now, like I said, I was quite successful. I was Rookie of the Year. I made my quota. My wife and I were sent to Vancouver for a week, all expenses paid. So on the surface, I was very successful, but I wasn't happy. So I left. Ironically, 2 months later, my new manager invited me out to a Toastmaster meeting, and that was my transition. Now, after a couple of years with Toastmasters, I started to realize what was missing when I was doing my sales representative job. And what was missing was that I was only focused on one thing when I got up to speak. I was focused on the knot in my stomach. I was not worried about the words or whether or not you were understanding me. I was just spitting them out and get them out as fast as I could so I could sit down and get rid of that knot that was in my stomach. And because of that, I became an expert. I was funneling all my energy into this negativity, and I became an expert at being anxious. So, I obviously said something right because people bought from me, but so I was knowledgeable about my subject matter, but I really wasn't focused on communicating it effectively at all. And so as time went on, I started to realize that the more I focused on other aspects of speaking, I started to strip away some of that negative energy, because we only have so much energy, and almost all of mine was gone into the knot in my stomach. So as I focused on managing the noise, as I focused on listening with my eyes, as I focused on eye contact, as I focused on facial expression, as I focused on vocal variety, as I focused on gestures, as I focused on the pause, every time I focused on that while I was up in front of a group of people, I peeled away more negative energy, and converted it into something constructive and positive. So look at converting the negative energy that you have into something constructive by viewing speaking as a craft, and apply the tools and concepts that I've shared with you. I think Dale Carnegie said it quite well with this quote. So, you know, what's the worst that can happen? Accept that and get on with it. If you want the benefit of being a confident speaker and everything that goes with that, and it does spill over into a lot of different aspects of our lives, then you have to be willing to accept that there's going to be some discomfort up front to get there. But it's a great journey. So the basic elements, and you're there first for a reason, because you're the one at the front of the room. You're the one that's the center of attention. So it's really important that you portray yourself in the best context possible. You're not comfortable yet speaking, then focus on creating the perception of confidence. And there's ways of doing that by standing erect, by standing flat-footed, by bringing your hands up from your sides and getting them involved and engaged in the communication process. Focus on the gestures that you want to create, and make sure that they're in sync with the gestures that the gestures are in sync with your verbal message. Because if they're not, then the audience is going to believe your gestures. So you need to make sure you make them in sync. Same with your facial expression too, by the way. So if your facial expression is not in sync with your oral message, then they're going to believe your facial expression. So make sure that they're in sync. You want to do your message. And your message is important. Now you know your message. So we did the 80-20 rule back a few slides ago. Yeah, maybe you do a little bit more, but they're just guidelines. But the point of this is that you need to make sure you've got your message down pat, that you're arriving prepared. You've got it done. You've been rehearsed. You got your delivery. You know exactly how you're going to deliver your message to the audience. And of course, your audience is the last piece of the puzzle. You want to engage them. You want to be addressing what's in it for them, because they're going to be asking that every single time you get up to speak. What's in it for me? Why am I here? What am I going to get out of this? They may not ask that question in those exact words, but that's the gist of what they're saying to themselves. And this is just a summary slide of the different concepts that I've shared with you. So, you know, communication model, remember there's 5 parts. Definitely look for the noise. Manage the noise wherever you can. We talked about the 3 V's, the verbal, the visual, the vocal, and the verbal. And recognize that because there's so much occurs at the non-visual level, that you have the opportunity to listen with your eyes. And then keep in mind that you have a speaker's toolbox. Speaking is a craft, and because it's a craft, you have tools available to you. And don't forget the 80-20 rule, where you spend a more proportionate time actually preparing your delivery, as opposed to preparing your content. And the last quote, if at first you do not succeed, you are about average. So it's a doing thing. You've got to get out and do it. And if you don't do it, then of course you can't expect to advance. Einstein said that, you know, if you're going to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, then it's a sign of insanity. So you've got to make change. So look for that change and then go ahead and execute on it. And that's it.